Well, good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday morning. And I got good news and bad news. Good news, I'm here. The bad news is most of my hair isn't. Uh, I was ordered by higher powers that I was getting a haircut, and
And they didn't stop at one.
they wouldn't stop at one. So I took my puppy, set her in my lap, and we climbed up into the chair of death. And they went to work, and when they were done, this is what was left. So, uh,
It's a lot
anyway,
easier to wash.
do what?
It's a lot easier to wash at that length.
Oh, that's a fact. I remember when for years, I had it down to the middle of my back, and I'd do the braids down the back, sometimes. Or my favorite was when I'd peel the stuff off that came down over the ear and put a braid down on either side in front of the ears. And then one day I had just got elected school board, and I said, well, nobody can say that I'm uh, getting pretty because I want to go into public service. And so I walked into a barber shop, and I can still see the chair, fourth back on the left. There's still tears on the ground under that chair, and got it done. But speaking of getting her done, um, we are BQ Press. One time a person told me, said, you know why I like you, Bob? You guys actually publish books. You don't just talk about publishing books. Uh, and you have to look at that and make sure that's true every day, every week, that you got something in uh, progress. And as you guys all know, we have had some books in progress for a while. And Scott's Planet, I just got the last set of notes back from one of my co-editors who said, or no, one of my writers who said, I really think your stories are out of order. You should reorder them. So I looked at that and I said, what a pleasant idea. Were I to be of any mind to, I could do that. But I found myself lacking the wherewithal to redo the entire table of contents, reformat the entire book, and move all the stories. And so I'm about ready to send the note today to inform them that I am going with what I got. The cover's uploaded, the book's uploaded. Uh, Life is good. So we got that. Phil and I, a long time ago, started a book. I wrote a book called about a alien law enforcement officer coming to work, coming to Earth, and realizing he could pose as the Mahdi, the 12th Mahdi, and he did so effectively and caused quite a bit of trouble. Well, that one is all sitting over here on my other screen, ready to go. Uh, Deborah Godfrey. Don't tell her I called her Debbie. Okay. Deborah Godfrey edited a wonderful book for us called The Alternative Leadership. It is a fantastic story of the concept of leadership, and not every leader is a woman. It's a very balanced book, and or as Trump would call it, woke. The But that one is in the final stages of some editing. So we're excited. We're going to have new books at Oricon because remember, this is the last Oricon. And it's a sad thing to see such a grand old dame laid down to rest. But it is happening. And then guest of honor at RadCon with guess who's going to be there. It looks like Jim Wright and David Gerald will be co-guests of honor. So it will be somewhat radical, but that is February 12th. Buy your memberships. And when you go to Oricon, I'm going to have a bunch of books down there that are not for sale at my dealer's table. They are donations there that the money goes directly to Radcon, and they will be using it to fly up Jim Wright. So very seldom can you put that kind of donation, get a product, and then have Jim show up for it. So it'll be great. That said, that's enough blathering from me. Almost 4 minutes of it. Wow. Hey, Tom, Karen, introduce us to your guest here while I say I'm only going to come back and bother you guys well, you guys know I'm a political beast. If I just can't resist the urge. So take care and do well.
All right. We have today for our guest, David Dyer Bennet, also known as DDB. I'll let him say a little bit about himself, but I'm going to say that I've known him for decades, and he is an excellent photographer who did a book on the aftermath of the George Floyd shooting. He is someone who's very interested in guns and gun policy, and he is intelligent. Yes, yes. Keep calm and carry on. Yes, well, carry open.
I usually stop short of open.
Okay, yes. And we're going to talk about the divide in the country and various other things, because Karen and I are hoping to start talking about living in the future. We'd originally planned to have a trans friend who at the age of 60 is becoming female, but with the Charlie Kirk shooting and the reaction of the right, we decided that it would not be safe for her to do this right now. We'll have her back later on. It's somebody who's been on the program already. So those of you who don't know, it'll be interesting to see the transition for yourselves.
I have had a certain amount of amusement among my housemates here in explaining that the original plan was to talk about trans people some, and that you decided that that wasn't safe. No argument. You're clearly right about that. And that getting into guns somewhat would be less challenging and less exciting. That amused people.
Yes.
Yes, I want to jump in for a moment and say I'm really, really pleased that DDB could be on the show with us. I'm really excited about it. And we have kind of made some promises that we are not going to talk about the most recent incident of gun violence that has got everyone talking, that we're going to try to go into more general terms and really figure out why it is that the issue of owning and using guns is such a flashpoint in America, and what it is about American society and American history that has led us to become a country, one of the major countries in the world that has the highest incidence of guns and gun violence. What I'm looking at, what America is becoming, what we might look at in terms of guns 20 years from now, which I'm really fascinated to talk about. So,
and I want to answer a question over in the sidebar, which is Liam Westcott says, if I'm remembering correctly, DDB is married to Cynthia Dyer Bennet, who wrote for Salon magazine. No, David is married to Pamela Dean, who writes great fantasy novels.
Cynthia is actually my cousin.
Yes. And, there's an even better known Dyer Bennet who you are also related to.
Richard Dyer Bennet was involved before and during the folk music scare in the 60s, when everyone was terrified for a couple of weeks that stuff might actually catch on. At this point, he started recording on his own label after his friend Burl Ives brought up his name to the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he suddenly lost his recording contracts, but he could still get touring engagements. So he kept touring, but also he started his own self-publishing business, Dyer Bennet Records, and simply he issued 13 numbered records, but I think there are 3 others. So something like 16 records on his own, mostly in the 60s. And those records are now all available in digital form through Smithsonian Folkways, as long as we brought him up.
Yes.
Very cool.
I like letting people know because the name does ring bells for certain people.
I get periodic random questions online. I've been online in ARPANET mailing lists and Usenet back pretty much as far as you could do that, and there's low numbers, but every few months I get a question, are you related to? And then I have to decide if it's going to be my father John or my uncle Richard, and there's some of both.
Yes. And now Cynthia.
Which is good. She's a notable person and a lot of fun. I'm not sure I met her as a child. We were the Midwestern branch of the family, and most of the rest of the Dyer Bennets were in the Bay Area. Cynthia was there, and Richard was out in Massachusetts. So unlike people who grow up around family and go visit them every week or whatever, most of my cousins I've met half a dozen times or something.
Mm. Anyway, to get back to what Karen was saying.
Well,
no,
it'd be-
I'm fine. I'd like DDB to tell me actually a little bit. You were talking about your family. Sort of, what is your individual history around guns?
I had a close escape from inheriting a 410 shotgun from my mother's side of the family back when I was a kid. And if my parents blocked it, they did it quietly without telling me. I don't remember why it didn't happen, but I don't remember being badly upset. I think it just didn't work out. My father and mother, I say, had no background with guns. This is not actually true because my father was drafted in 1940 and served through 1945 and was in England and crossed the Channel and was in France and I think Germany. So he had some experience with guns. Not so far as I know, he wasn't really in a frontline combat role, but he certainly had training before they let him do any of that. Jumping forward to Korea, he was actually in charge of the instructors teaching anti-aircraft gunnery at Aberdeen Proving Grounds for Korea. I suppose that's guns too, although bigger than I'm allowed to own, even in America. I was interested in fencing and martial arts and knives and swords and self-defense techniques. And I took fencing a few terms in college, did some fencing with the local fencing club up here in Minneapolis after I was out of college. I was in the Minneapolis Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu School for 4 years, and it was fascinating how foil fencing, arguably the most artificial sword-related, combat-related thing ever invented, and the Southern Praying Mantis Kung Fu, which is arguably one of the more practical but certainly not one of the most straightforward martial arts things invented, work together. They both deflect rather than hard blocking. They both get information from contact. There's just surprising things. And, I was a lot younger then, so more things surprised me then, as back when I was in high school and college a bit. The friend who got me into Kung Fu also had a gun, which I could have done. I could have walked down to one of the hardware stores downtown and bought myself a gun. And
was this in Minneapolis?
That was actually down in Northfields, about 40 miles south of here. The Minnesota has, I'm going to say always, but you never know what weird things might have happened back in history before I was paying attention. So far as I know, unlike some states, in Minnesota, the same state laws have applied to guns everywhere. There aren't special laws for certain cities the way some places with really big cities tend to have it. Now, we have, what do we have? I think we have just over half of the state population here in the metro area. So it's a locally big city, but it's not actually a big city. It's about 1.5 million metro. Of course, there aren't really any big cities in the United States if you start checking around and looking at populations. So we didn't have a good place to shoot. And looking back, I'm afraid that we probably did some things that weren't a good idea, but luckily we didn't manage to hurt anybody. They're not only not us, so we were pretty good about not hurting us, but we also did manage not to hurt anybody else. And the basic problem here is lack of training. I say this as someone who's been certified by both the NRA and a couple of different Minnesota organizations back when to teach various things, including Minnesota carry permit courses. I started doing that in 2003 when we switched over from may issue to shall issue, which was kind of the second biggest 20th century change in gun laws. I got a couple of guns up here in Minneapolis around 78, and I had two friends, both of whom were quite good, knew what they were doing, and they taught me informally. I don't think either of them were certified instructors, and I certainly wasn't in an official class that I paid for, but they taught me not everything I know really, but everything I needed to know. Having gone through the NRA instructor training, the carry permit instructor training, there wasn't anything important that I hadn't already been taught. So they did a good job. And up here, there were a lot more public ranges where I could go shoot and really practice. And by then, partly because it's up here, but partly just because time had passed, there were a lot of indoor ranges. And I'm the sort of wuss who's actually, for pistol distances, well, I mean, I'd rather shoot at rifle distances indoors too, but indoors doesn't really come equipped with rifle distances very much.
Backing up a little bit, you're a member of the science fiction community. And my impression has been that probably a minority of people in the science fiction community have guns. How did your friends and colleagues react to the fact that you had a gun? Did it make them feel safer? Did it make them wonder about you? What was the general feeling about it? And did you let people know?
I did let people know, even at the beginning. There were the two people who taught me were both people out of local fandom. There were a number of other people who were at least interested in guns. We had a couple of range days where we went out to someone's land where they had an informal range, and we could shoot informally without paying any range fees. And without the problem with indoor ranges is that the sound echoes, because indoor ranges are nearly they're concrete on all six sides generally. So when a pistol goes off, it makes a heck of a noise. That's where I learned, even outdoors, you want to wear hearing protection. Indoors, I learned to put earplugs in and then put the muffs over them, doubling up. And I discovered that the first day there were people on both sides of my lane shooting 44 Magnum revolvers. Noisy buggers. Okay. So we had friendly small scale stuff. It didn't require, well, okay. Just as I bought my first guns, Minnesota changed its law and started requiring a state permit to carry a gun.
Interesting.
Before that, no permit was required. It was back then easy to get the permit, and it just got gradually harder and harder and harder until it was about impossible. We had a big round, a much more confrontational and problematic in local fandom around guns, to the point where we created a couple of official rules which are not worth getting into. A local author, since sadly deceased, a very good friend of mine, Joel Rosenberg. Some people will have run into his Guardians of the Flame series, which was pretty clearly his bestseller. Anyone who is interested in Joel's books at all, I recommend Paladins, which is the first book of a series. The second book was written, and then it dead-ended because of publisher interest and then Joel dying. Anyway, he was essentially teasing Nazis online and started getting credible death threats, including credible death threats, the sort of credible death threats that identify details of his property, suggesting that people do in fact know where he lives. And that was enough for him and his wife to get a carry permit at a time when I failed to get a carry permit on the explanation that I was doing a lot of photography of musicians in informal jam sessions and things, which meant carrying thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment late at night in bad neighborhoods. And I couldn't get a carry permit for that. But he got a carry permit for those threats and became a really serious right to keep and bear arms activist, and got involved with the lawyers and the people who were lobbying the Minnesota legislature, and then actually wrote the Minnesota Citizens Personal Protection Act, which was the act that changed Minnesota from a may issue state to a shall issue state. Shall issue means that the law says that anybody who meets listed objective requirements and applies for a permit will be given a permit. There is a special case where the police have the opportunity to bring up issues that they think should interfere, but they have to be good issues. That part is not absolutely objective, but
DDB, for someone like me who doesn't have a gun, is there a difference between gun ownership and gun carry? In other words, could I have guns in my house legally, but
Okay.
not carry them off my property. And that would be perfectly legal for me to have a gun in my living room.
It often is. The first thing about guns is that while the dealer network is federally licensed, and there are federal laws about guns, most of the laws about possession, storage, and carry are all state laws. So 50 different answers.
At least.
At least there are cases where cities have special rights.
And there's Puerto Rico and
Guam.
Guam.
I'm guessing that there are laws there, that are local, but I don't actually know. So yeah, in most places that aren't really thoroughly anti-gun, like New York and California, you can go to a federally licensed dealer and buy a gun there. They're required to perform a background check through the big FBI system. And if you get your gun, you're allowed to transport it home. In many states, in Minnesota, but this is a fairly common setup, if you don't have the permit to transport it home, you have to store it unloaded in the trunk or the furthest back portion of the car if there isn't a trunk. But it has to be not immediately accessible and not immediately ready to use. But you can carry it home like that, carry it into the house. Most places, and in Minnesota particularly, in the house, I can store it loaded. I can put it in a holster and wander around my house with it, all that stuff. I've got some push-button combination lock boxes that the immediate self-defense guns in the house live in. Although if I'm carrying that day, I just leave it on my belt because that's more easily accessible than the box.
I have a question, again, coming from where I am. Has there been, in various municipalities, are there laws around lock boxes that if you have children in the house, you must use the lock box? Because I have seen in the Seattle area some instances where parents got in trouble because kids could easily access the guns.
There are, again, state laws. I'm not sure. There might be specifically municipal cases. A lot of states have a state law that says the state law preempts all lower jurisdictions' gun laws. Basically, the state wants to keep all the control of guns to themselves. And those are laws that tend to be supported by gun owners because living in a patchwork where you people been to Minicon in the old Radisson, where walking from the Bloomington to the Edina room might change the gun laws that applied, right? We don't approve of that level of patchwork. And a lot of the anti-gun people, I'm not trying to be provocative. There are people who want more gun laws than we have who are not really anti-gun people, but I'm saying anti-gun people specifically to identify a group that, to my view of it, are using the full anti-playbook. It's the same playbook that anti-abortion people use. It's the same playbook that anti-nuke people use. The anti-gun people use it. And one of the main aspects of it is to throw any possible impediment in the way of people who want to do whatever the thing is that you're anti. And that's things like different laws in different cities. Things like if you get a carry permit, you can't carry on the city's public transportation. bingo, suddenly if you're a poor person, or even if you live in the high density part of the city, your right to carry a gun has been taken away. And the public transit, you run into a lot more problematic people. Mostly, they don't attack you at a level that needs defense. Mostly.
One of the reasons that we're doing this show is that I have been really astonished, but then when I've thought about it, not astonished by the number of people I know who would identify as progressives politically, who are out there becoming gun owners, going through training, and experiencing the gun ownership culture, which is a very, very interesting one. And I wanted to do this because I want to be better informed. And I really want my friends in the science fiction community to be better informed. For many years before I became a science fiction community member, I was involved as a mystery reviewer. I reviewed thousands of mystery novels. And it shocked me the number of writers who actually had no idea how a gun worked. And I was particularly astonished by one in particular who was writing in a neighborhood I had grown up in which people were shooting everybody, but nobody ever heard the gunshots or called the police. And it was like, guns are really loud. So I'm hoping that with people understanding guns better, it will help their understanding of people who are going about getting trained in it.
Training is really good. And I will say that every single one of the NRA classes I've taken, and I mean, instructor classes, so this is not for beginners. This is for people that they've already decided are people. Sorry, I got a weird notification on my screen about power. It's supposed to be plugged in, and I was checking the back plug. The back plug is okay. I'll check something out if I ever shut up long enough.
Well, our goal is to keep you talking.
Well, yes, I know. If I suddenly disappear, that's what happened.
And
okay,
at some point, I want Tom to talk about his background with guns because it's interesting.
Okay, absolutely.
It's minimal, but yeah.
I've read a lot of mystery books. One of my humorous lines I got from Joel Rosenberg. I'm not absolutely sure if he got it from elsewhere or if it's actually his. He wrote and got published several mystery novels also, and he also read mystery novels. And his advice to authors, the short form of the advice, is if you're going to mention a specific gun in your book, and this can come up in fantasy and science fiction too, always say that it is a modified Glock 17. Because that way, if you get something wrong, you can say, oh, well, that one was modified. It's not, it gets a little too weird if it happens too often, but I liked it as a joke, at least. I think I lost the intro to where I was going. So what do we want next?
Well, let's talk about if someone decides that they want to know more about guns, are there places that you can go and try them out before you buy one?
Yes. It varies, but it's a common thing these days that there are indoor gun ranges that are associated with a gun store, often sharing premises associated, and most of those will, strangely, rent you a gun. So you can go in, rent a gun from them, use it on buy some ammunition from them, use it on their range. They'll give you at least a little bit of upfront advice. And on a range, the instructions can be much simpler. There's all sorts of complexities that you can just forget. On the range, the gun is either in your hands pointed at the backstop, or it is on the table in front of you pointed at the backstop. It is never anywhere else until you want to leave, at which point you unload it, put it in the case, and then carry it out. And all sorts of complexities that if you're carrying it around in the real world are relevant and you have to learn to think about. In a range environment, you can just pare off the complexities to the point where if they do follow the rules, one of the standard things that it just takes time to get used to is I'm sorry, but you people are downrange. I'm shooting at the target downrange, and then someone on my left says, "Hey, DDB," and what do? You do, yeah. And your friends stop you from doing that fairly quickly.
When
I will point out that both Teresa Nielsen Hayden and Dick Lupoff have written articles about getting to use a submachine gun in this sort of situation, which is not something that you can own, but you can.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's very hard.
It is very hard and very expensive.
Yes.
But then, at the rate those things burn through ammo, shooting it is also kind of expensive.
Yes.
When I was writing a mystery, I had a friend who is a private investigator and was actually the gun supplier to the Seattle Police Department come to my house and teach me how guns were handled and loaded and stuff like that. And he had guns on my dining room table and we were mucking around with them. And he kept pointing out all of the instances in which if I picked up a gun that way, I was going to shoot somebody or shoot the wall or something, because you just, they're objects. You tend to move them around and look at them. And it really actually helped me understand how someone who had no experience with guns could get in trouble with one incredibly fast.
Quickly got to the point where Joel and I and a bunch of our friends lost the ability to make that gesture and point it at someone. Yeah, I had to apologize to you people in advance when I was going to demonstrate the swing thing.
Yes.
And it still bothered me. I thought about whether I should not do it, but you're actually not on the other side of this screen. You are not actually endangered, even if I'd had a gun. It gets in fairly deep. Every single NRA class, including the really advanced ones, they always start with the basic rules, which most of the people taking those classes learned when they were 8. You know, I've been around. I've got a friend he's a professional photographer and ad designer, but he works mostly with the firearms industry down in Tennessee, and he's got a whole lot of gun world friends, a lot more than me, because he has the professionals in the industry, and because he gets to photograph all the neat toys. So when his friends come over, they get to see and maybe play with all the neat toys. So, you know, I've been around integrally suppressed submachine guns, things like that. I've gone down.
What is an integrally suppressed submachine gun?
Okay, a suppressor is what is most commonly called a silencer, and most commonly they are a separate device that screws into threading in the barrel. An integrally suppressed one is one that is built either from the very beginning or rebuilt by a gunsmith, so that the silencer, the suppressor, isn't a separate unit that just quickly screws off and gets set aside. It's an inherent part of the barrel.
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, funny thing about suppressors, they're one of the most restricted things in America, like subject to many of the same restrictions as full auto weapons, machine guns. Whereas in Norway and Finland, for example, they are considered basic safety devices, and there are many regions where hunting is only legal with a suppressed rifle. You cannot use an unsuppressed rifle for your hunting. I've been around shooting suppressed pistols outdoors, and a suppressed 22 pistol with subsonic ammo, almost all the ordinary handgun and rifle ammo, the bullet exits at supersonic velocities. It makes a sonic boom because it's going supersonic. You can't quiet the sonic boom part because that takes place outside the gun, out in the free air. So if you really want it quiet, you can buy subsonic ammo. The bullet exits the gun below the speed of sound, so there's no sonic boom. Now, yeah, kinetic energy, 1/2 mv squared.
Yeah.
Right? Notice that it's the v, the velocity, that's squared. So going to subsonic ammo loses you a lot of muzzle energy. And the muzzle energy is what's easy to measure. It gradually slows down as it transits the air due to air resistance. But when it hits something, the damage it done is the kinetic energy of the bullet being deposited into the target. Unless it's going so fast that it goes right through the target, in which case you only get a partial transfer. Anyway, with subsonic ammo, which is a big compromise in effectiveness, in a 22, which just burns less powder, so it makes less noise to begin with, you can hear the metal parts hitting each other as the slide moves back and forth, because the suppressor gets rid of the actual sound and there's no sonic boom. So we actually don't feel we need hearing protection with a 22 outdoors with subsonic ammo. If you go up to a 9mm, much bigger bullet, much heavier bullet, still with subsonic ammo, we think we need hearing protection for that. It's that much louder. It's a lot quieter than without the suppressor. So, half a mile away, you probably wouldn't hear it. Maybe 500 yards away. 500 yards is way too close to half a mile. Anyway.
It's a third of a mile. Under a third.
Yeah. So, but it's fascinating to hear how much difference there is. So if you're talking about professional assassins, which I'm pretty sure are almost entirely fictional, if they're actually using a 22, then a suppressed 22 with subsonic ammo, you really won't hear it in the next room.
Wow.
But
interesting.
But that really only works for the style of assassin where you basically run up behind them and from about a foot away put 2 or 3 bullets into their skull. Remember, you've lost a lot of your energy, and a 22 isn't very powerful to begin with.
This is starting to sound like a James Bond novel, which actually brings me to my question. I've lived and traveled a lot in Western Europe, and individuals in mainland Europe tend not to own anything except hunting rifles, if they own guns at all. I stayed in country estates where people shot wild boar and things like that, but you don't find individuals with pistols, revolvers, whatever. Why do you think, when you consider that in the 40s, there was a heavy military experience in all of these regions and people were trained, why do you think the United States has evolved to have such a higher density of guns than Western Europe?
Well, first of all, even pre-War II, European countries had a lot more constraints on firearms ownership than we did. But also, we had the Wild West in our recent history,
Okay.
right? That's mostly post-Civil War. And an awful lot of the people who homesteaded out west were veterans of the Civil War. And that's the period when the highly objectionable phrase, "here comes the cavalry," entered the American dialect because, right, "here comes the cavalry" means that you're losing to the Indians whose land you're trying to steal, but the cavalry is going to come and save your ass. And how much of that was real, I don't know, but I watched Rin Tin Tin. I watched some of that stuff. It was less stupid, at least to my knowledge as a child. It was less stupid than the science fiction on television. Star Trek wasn't really that good, original Star Trek, the only one I've seen. But it was so head and shoulders above other TV series that were science fiction, and it had real SF authors writing stuff, and DC Fontana actually cared that at least within an episode things were vaguely plausible, and it still bugged me. It was 30 years behind the written SF, but it was better than the other stuff on TV. So I'd watch it.
Most of the other stuff, I would put in a word for Men into Space, which was very near future science fiction that was actually done intelligently.
Okay, I don't think I even heard of it. Never mind watching it.
It was about 1960.
Well, let's see. By 63, my parents had a television.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had access to a television from something like 62 or 63 up through 72.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't have one until 86.
So what we're now painting is a picture of an America with a Wild West, and that Wild West informing a lot of 1960s television and causing people to experience a lot of people addressing issues and defending themselves or attacking other people with guns. I mean,
I think that's a factor.
And a lot of noir, I like a lot of noir mystery that has gone onto the screen, and a lot of it involves guns. People threatening people with guns, people holding people up, people being in remote areas and solving their problems in the absence of the law with guns.
Weird, strange fact. General aviation aircraft flying in Alaska are required to carry a firearm. Bear defense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which means it has to be a fairly hefty firearm.
I'm not sure that the law specifies that, but the standard joke is that if you go after a bear with the standard 7.65 millimeter P38 pistol that was one of the common issues in the Wehrmacht, what's going to happen is that if the bear notices that you shot at it, the bear will take it away from you and stuff it up your ass.
Mm. Yeah.
You actually just brought me to a question. One of the strongest arguments to my ears about why people like me, small persons, should not have guns is that an assailant will take my gun away from me, that it is easy for me to be overpowered.
nearly unheard of in the real world. It's the anti-gun talking point, but it very, very rarely happens. Furthermore, it happens more often to police than to civilians.
Interesting.
Well, there's at least one reason for that. The police, their job is to get close enough to handcuff the person.
Okay.
And that opens the possibility. In self-defense, you can stand across the room and say, if you come towards me, I am going to change your topological order. I wouldn't put it that way because the criminal wouldn't understand it, but a hole through them will do that.
So I actually see that we are getting towards end of the show. And before Bob comes in and gives us his wisdom on the topic, which I know he is itching to do, DDB, I want you to join us in a science fiction experiment in which we look ahead 10, 20 years. What do you think the landscape in the United States will be around general understanding of guns, general use of guns, laws around guns? What will we as a society look like to the outside world in terms of guns?
The uncertainty level is much higher than 5 years ago. I feel like this is in the area of guesswork.
Yes, it is.
But here's
You
my
get
guess.
to.
Yeah, it's really hard to predict things, especially the future. So here's my guesswork. The rest of the world will view America as a place that finally, after so long, adopted the same restrictive anti-gun policies most of the rest of the world has, and they will all be very puzzled why our violence rate has stayed as high as it was, or maybe even gone up. Because the thing about guns, the thing about handguns, is they are vastly the best surprise self-defense weapon. They're small enough and light enough that you can carry them when you're not expecting trouble. You ain't going to carry a rifle if you're not expecting trouble. It's just too heavy, too clunky, too inconvenient. You don't do it. It might be legal where you are, but it's just too much trouble. And you know, if standard RKBA joke, I used it in class. If you know that there's going to be a shooting at Lake and Hennepin at 3 p.m. that afternoon, what gun will you carry? Answer, I'll carry my usual gun, but I sure won't be anywhere near Lake and Hennepin.
Yeah.
And you can nearly always, at least one overly macho person tells you what gun they'd carry. And the classes are mostly about teaching them that the police aren't their friend and teaching them some of the law. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm still in the future. The pistol is what gives me at 70 a chance against a 20-year-old serial predator who makes his living mugging people. The thing is, I don't believe that the gun will always and instantly save me. I believe that armed people who know what they're doing vastly increase the predator problem among the people who are trying to make a living as predators. If you're a serial rapist, you only have to meet one or two people with a gun before your career is over. If you're a serial mugger, you only have to meet one or two people before your career is over. Maybe just because you can't run fast enough anymore. You don't have to be dead. And it might not save me, but competent people who are not likely to lose their head and get really stupid really shift the odds for people who have to attack people over and over again. Predator problem comes from real animal studies where, the poor cheetah has to kill something every few days or they starve to death. And if they get injured enough that they can't run down a deer anymore, then they starve to death, right? One of the the first evidence of human society really is healed fractures of the femur, because you don't get a healed fracture of a femur unless other people helped you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tom, I think we need to start winding up here. Why don't you go for it, Tom?
You want me to tell me the story about my Uncle Buffalo, don't you?
No,
okay. My first experience with a gun was when I was 4 or 5, and my great uncle, who was one of the co-founders of the CIA, had me fire a rifle on an island in the Potomac, and I learned that I didn't enjoy it. But anyway, I think we've had a good discussion. I think we've had some really interesting information come out. I hope that it's been useful. It's been fascinating that there has been much less commentary over on the side than we usually see and hear. And I'm hoping that people enjoyed this, because I certainly did. I found it a good conversation and useful for us to have. Is there anything that you'd like to say to sort of wind up, David?
But Tom, you're cutting out a little bit.
David was cutting out a little bit too, but how's this, better? Anyway, I noticed that we got much less commentary than usual, but I hope people enjoyed it. And is there anything you'd like to say to sum up, David, before we hand it over to Bob?
I encourage people to think about their own reactions in stress when deciding whether they want to be armed. You shouldn't be a person who dithers and panics. You gotta stay calm. And then you should get basic training, and absolutely to the point where you are incapable of picking up a gun without instantly ejecting the magazine and checking that the chamber is clear. Just spend enough time in ranges, people will make sure you do that. Practice makes perfect. Find someone who is practical and defense-oriented who can mentor you is the other thing. One-on-one tends to work better than classes for most people. And it's less scary. Because in a class, there are 18 other individuals who don't know what they're doing all around you. And if that's not scary, you're not paying attention. Believe me, I'm instructor in some of those classes. At least I'm up front facing them.
Downrange.
I want to say that there are a bunch of comments on Facebook, but the comment stream on Restream did not happen. It just disappeared. But Facebook has a bunch of comments.
Well, there really ought to be a way to merge those streams, but
there usually has been.
I would, since we're coming into the end, I would just leave a couple of observations. David, you've made a whole bunch of really great notions about what would be good, but the gun lobby fights like hell to keep any of those suggestions about what would make guns safer from ever getting put in place. So what I hear is a bunch of false, just kind of, here, let's go appease the masses by saying all the right things and look like a reasonable gun guy, when in the reality, and I know that you don't, or maybe you do, but the lobby, the gun lobby, does not support these. The NRA does not support these. Republican politicians do not support these. And so speaking them as if they were part of the reasonable gun culture is disingenuous to me. Secondly, the notion that anybody who proposes reasonable gun regulations or background checks, etc., is anti-gun. I can go into that room on the other side of that wall and find 6 guns that are stored correctly in good operating condition that absolutely. But on the other hand, those I don't need to have dead kids laying on the streets to justify my gun fetish, because if I look at the way things were before 2012 and after 2012 was when the NRA started lobbying to get rid of regulations on silencers, as you don't like to hear them called, or suppressors. And
Something I don't like to. It overrates what they can accomplish.
they pushed the Washington D.C. case. I can't remember Heller
Heller.
case that totally changed gun laws that had been in the country since 1939, and as a result, since then, we have almost doubled our gun deaths to the point that it's something like 36,000 people a year.
No, the gun deaths are down since then.
You want to argue statistics? I mean, I can go pull you up and give it to you, but for the sake of this, let's not. I haven't challenged any of your assertions beyond saying it.
You've challenged my good faith.
Huh?
You have challenged my good faith. And there's a couple things.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
When someone says,
I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm merely saying you have.
Okay, well, good. Because I believe that the gun lobby is generally a disingenuous organization that is pushing things for the sake of making more money for gun companies and ammunition makers than they are about looking out for the well-being of the American people. So, yeah, if that's the challenge, I make it. Doesn't mean I'm never going to speak to you again or not invite you on the show again. But part of this whole discussion is if someone is saying something that you don't believe or you see is harmful to the country, and we allow ourselves to be bullied or pressured into silence, then we are just as bad as the people that are doing it. And so
that's why I'm here, in fact, yes. Okay.
I mean, your term for anybody that had issues with guns is they're suddenly anti-gun. I'm anti-violence.
Okay, I carefully
I'm opposed
hedged
to
anti-gun
to
also.
Kill our children.
Bob, I think that you're aiming at a target that, if you don't mind the phrase, that is somewhat to the right of DDB. And also, I mean, part of what I was doing here is trying to get people.
It's okay. I've got nothing more to say. You don't need to pressure me for silence anymore.
I'm not pressuring you for silence. I'm orienting our audience a little bit to the fact that the points you bring, Bob, are really good, but they were a little tangential to the focus of the show, which I was trying to get the general public that doesn't have guns more informed about it and gun culture.
No problem. I'm going to pretend that I haven't had people packing guns coming up to me at protests and stand beside me and stick their hip up so I can make sure I see their gun and they know I should be properly intimidated. And they do it when I got my daughter there. Now, no problem, because the gun culture is a culture of intimidation, and I will leave it at that and say no more.
Bob, I have to get in there and say, I am seeing a different gun culture arise among friends of mine who are liberal, who have decided they're going to safely learn how to use guns. They are not coming up and intimidating you at protests. And there is another part of gun culture that's very much there in America, and I'm interested in learning more about it. I already know about the assholes with the guns on their hips at protests, but there is a silent gun culture that I'm interested in finding out more about. which is anyway.
Well, we were at the end of the show and you asked,
Yes.
so.
But Bob,
Yeah.
I'm really glad you let us do this show because
Oh,
BQ Press is all about. I want to give a plug for our book Alternative Liberties, which has a magnificent story about a guy who does gun training, and it is one of our very best stories. And I
well,
urge people to look at that.
I don't hide my opinion. I tend to try and base it on facts. And I try not to use too many pejorative words. If I mean, I don't think have I called you a gun nut today, DB?
No, but I might
Nah,
be one.
not going to either. Okay.
Not a particular style of gun nut, but I might be a gun nut.
Well, you promote gun use, and yet you promote safe gun use. It's just the organizations that bothers me about it is the rest of the organizations out there aren't.
Well, check. Okay, the thing I most wanted actually to respond to was a factual thing. Again, your suggestion that the gun laws never change. In
No,
my
they get
lifetime,
changed. They just get changed the wrong way.
now in my lifetime, the gun, almost everything that is defining in the current set of gun laws is new in my lifetime. The federal licensing of dealers is new in my lifetime. The concept of a prohibited person who can't buy guns, including convicted felons, that is new in my lifetime. The concept, the rule that you can only buy firearms in your home state is new in my lifetime. The fact that you cannot easily ship guns through the mail and that you cannot buy guns mail order, that is new in my lifetime. That's all new. It completely upended, utterly changed the gun laws. Those things were all the Gun Control Act of 1968.
And
Getting
Bob,
our
Before-
president shot kind of impacted America, I admit.
I have to jump in and say that the gun laws have gone in one direction in California and in a completely different direction in Arizona and Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, it just like the country has divided dramatically, the gun laws have also divided dramatically.
Let's go back to one of the very first points that David made, which is it's by state, almost everything. It's not the federal government that's really controlling what's happening.
Most of the
We
federal
don't have
stuff.
a federal government. We have a Supreme Court anymore.
That's another
That's
show.
a whole other show.
Well, anyway, Tom, you guys got anything you want to say? DD, you want to close out with a comment? I mean, I got to speak.
Tom and I will be back in a month with more controversial stuff to make Bob crazy.
David,
I
hope you've enjoyed this, David.
Thank you, David.
That was I listened to your show and enjoyed what you had to say. Did a little bit of fact checking along the way, and I've so thanks for coming in there, DD. And we'll talk to y'all